Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today we're doing the second Napoleon video, Napoleon's masterpiece, Austerlitz 1805. I'm going to be jumping back and forth between Napoleon videos, and then I'm going to start History March's series on Hannibal. So I'll go back and forth. I'll do a Hannibal video later today or tomorrow. But with all that being said, let's get into it.
An Epic History TV History March collaboration, supported by our sponsor, The Great Courses Plus. In December 1804, in the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself Emperor of the French. Europe had never seen such a sudden and dramatic rise to power. A son of impoverished Corsican nobility to military dictator of France in little more than 10 years. Revolution and war had cleared Napoleon's path to the throne. War would dominate his 10-year reign. A conflict unprecedented in history that would leave millions dead and a continent in turmoil.
They kind of jump over a lot of things right there. Napoleon brings back the church from the revolution. That's one of the things he brings back. However, he drastically curbs the power of the church in France. It's why he crowns himself during the ceremony and not the Pope crowning him. This was not, that was the way things were done before, where there was this kind of circular power between the church and the state. He did not want to bring that back, and he wanted to show that he was not bringing that back. Also, one of the things I talked about in the comments was that Napoleon was from nobility, but he was not from a high enough noble family to kind of have open access to the government and oligarch, right? And so he had a ceiling placed on how high he would rise up through the ranks because of his birth, basically, right? Once the revolution happens and all of that is overthrown, then France goes to war. There's a couple of different things that work in his favor. One, his political leanings and political connections help him. Two, that ceiling of the oligarchy is now gone. That's thrown out of the way. And three, when a war is happening and there are lots of losses across the board, it is very, very noticeable when somebody continues to win. You see this with Ulysses S. Grant in the American Civil War. The North is getting beat all across the front, right? But Ulysses S. Grant is winning. And so it's very easy to rise through the ranks when everybody is losing and you are winning. That's kind of what happened. Like I said, Napoleon has a handful of things that are working in his favor, but it is an extremely fast rise to power. And you go from this revolutionary France where, it's this crazy republic where you have anti-revolutionaries being killed and beheaded and all that, to you essentially go right back to a monarch, but this time under Napoleon.
8 months after Napoleon's coronation, the French Empire and its Spanish ally were at war with Britain, and Napoleon had assembled an army of 180,000 men along the Channel coast. But as long as the British Royal Navy ruled the seas, invasion was impossible. But nor could Britain challenge France on land. And so British Prime Minister William Pitt tried to build a European coalition against Napoleon, using diplomacy and gold. Britain would prove Napoleon's most steadfast enemy, and its press delighted in relentless mockery of the French Emperor. Britain and France were old rivals in Europe and overseas. But now, Pitt feared Napoleon's conquests had made France too powerful. The French Emperor had to be defeated, and Europe's balance of power restored if there was ever to be lasting peace. Pitt found willing allies in Europe, among monarchs who despised Napoleon as a product of the French Revolution and a dangerous threat to the existing order. Austria harboured the deepest grievances, having seen her influence in Germany and Italy steadily eroded by French victories. The final straw came in May 1804, when Napoleon had also crowned himself King of Italy in Milan. Austria, Russia, Sweden and Naples joined Britain in an alliance known as the Third Coalition, and devised an ambitious plan for a series of joint offensives against France. The main attack would be made by a combined Austro-Russian army, advancing across the Rhine into France. But Napoleon got word of their plans, and reacted with typical speed and decision. He was determined to strike first, before the Allies could join forces, and ordered his army, now renamed La Grande Armée, to march to the River Rhine. His target was the Austrian army of General Mack, which had made a premature advance against Bavaria, a French ally, and was now dangerously isolated from the other Allied armies. Napoleon ordered Marshal Murat, his famously flamboyant cavalry commander, to make feint attacks through the Black Forest, while the rest of his army, advancing at speed, enveloped Mack's army from the north. That summer, Napoleon's Grande Armée was at its most formidable. Well-trained, highly motivated, its regiments at full strength. What's more, it had been newly reorganized according to the corps system, later imitated by virtually every army in the world. Each corps, commanded by a marshal, was a mini-army of 15,000 to 30,000 soldiers, with its own infantry, cavalry, artillery and supporting arms, such as reconnaissance, engineers and transport.
And this is one of those things that, looking back, it's like, yeah, this makes sense. Why didn't everybody do this? Everybody did not do this. This was virtually, it wasn't new. There were other military leaders that have done it going way, way back, but it was not the norm. This was not how armies were normally made. In fact, you still see, some breakdown of major armies in the Franco-Prussian War after this point. There's something about the willingness for one to break down his army into lesser forces, and you can kind of understand the thought process, right? What Napoleon is going to do here is he is going to attack the two armies coming, the Prussian army and the Russian army, or I believe it's the Prussian army. I think it's the Prussian army. I'll look at it in a second. Anyway, he's going to attack these two armies before they can get together, right? And that makes sense. You're going to attack them before they can get their whole force together. The idea that an army is separated and there are a bunch of different groups that can be doing different things makes it seem as if it would be easier to break, right? It's one of those things that's maybe a little bit counterintuitive, but the thing about it is when the groups are smaller, they are so much faster on the field. They can react to different things, different realities happening on the battlefield very, very quickly. And so that's one of the things that great generals are known for historically is their speed. And that is something Napoleon uses. He's known for his artillery. Obviously, he came from artillery, so that's, and he uses them all the time in great innovative ways. But speed is something that is just constant for Napoleon. It is constantly outmaneuvering, surprising, encircling. It's speed all over the place. And the tactical ability for these smaller units to use their speed to outmaneuver the enemy.
This meant each corps could march and fight for a limited time independently, allowing Napoleon to break with the old doctrine of keeping his army concentrated, and advance with his corps widely dispersed. This helped to disguise his real objective and increased movement speed, because the army could advance along multiple roads and live off the land, taking its supplies from scattered villages, rather than relying on slow-moving supply wagons. When the enemy's main force was located, the army could quickly concentrate for battle. This is how Napoleon's army was able to move at a speed that often surprised and disorientated his enemies. Mack didn't realize the danger he...
Austria. Sorry, I'm a dummy. Austria, of course, because Vienna is where the danger lies. So sorry about the mistake on that, not Prussia, Austria.
...was in until it was too late. Napoleon's fast-moving corps crossed the Danube behind him and surrounded his army. Mack launched a series of poorly coordinated counterattacks, but despite some desperate fighting, the Austrians couldn't break out of the trap. Mack hoped that Kutuzov's Russian army could arrive in time to save him, but the Russians were still 160 miles away. And so, at Ulm, on the 19th of October, just 6 weeks into the war, Mack surrendered his army to Napoleon. The French took nearly 60,000 Austrian prisoners, and Napoleon had struck his first devastating blow against the coalition. Russian General Mikhail Kutuzov was an experienced and wary commander, more cautious than Mack. His army was exhausted after its 900-mile march from Russia, but hearing of the Austrians' surrender at Ulm, and knowing he wasn't strong enough to face Napoleon alone, he immediately ordered a retreat. Napoleon pursued. The Russians fought several sharp rearguard actions, but could not save the Austrian capital, Vienna, which the French occupied on the 12th of October. Kutuzov slipped away to Olmütz in today's Czech Republic, where he was joined by reinforcements, as well as Emperor Alexander of Russia and Emperor Francis of Austria in person. Napoleon was furious that Kutuzov had escaped. By now his army was also exhausted, and far from home, with winter approaching. He needed to force a decisive battle quickly. Fortunately for him, the overconfident 27-year-old Russian emperor sought the glory of battle, overriding the concerns of his veteran commander, General Kutuzov.
You see this a lot with really, really well-known historical generals. They do really well when not necessarily backed into a corner, but kind of. They're not backed into a corner because they're surrounded by another army, but backed into a corner because of food or supplies or weather or just something that has kind of backed them up into a corner. They do really well in those circumstances. It's why the idea of, like with Hannibal in Rome, the idea of just shadowing him and kind of, making him lose supplies and maybe make a tactical mistake, that's actually the move. That's actually the best way to go about it with generals such as this, because when you back them into a corner, they want a decisive victory. They want a big battle. And so if you give them that, you are playing into what they want. You are playing into what they do well. Whereas if you don't give them that, you may have an ability to kind of strangle them with supplies or something of that sort. But they are very, very good at the game that they are basically going to get you to play. And that is just a major open battle.
With the Allied army closing in, Napoleon ordered his corps to rapidly concentrate on a battlefield he had carefully selected. near the town of Austerlitz. Napoleon oversaw the dispositions of his army late into the night, then grabbed a few hours' sleep beside a campfire. Dawn would mark the first anniversary of his coronation as emperor, and promised a battle that would make or break his young empire. The morning of the 2nd of December 1805 was cold and bright with a heavy mist. Two armies of near equal size faced each other across a 7-mile-wide battlefield. But the Allies held the high ground of the Pratzen Heights, while French Third Corps under Marshal Davout was still marching to the battlefield. Seeing Napoleon's thinly stretched right flank, the Allies planned a large-scale attack from the Pratzen Heights to steamroller the French right, before swinging round to envelop Napoleon's army.
Real quick, something like that that's super obvious, Napoleon wants you, like, that's the whole thing. If something is, like, way too obvious to, like, be real, it is. It's there for a reason.
Little did they know, Napoleon was counting on his weak right wing luring the Allies into just such a move, whereupon he would launch his own attack on the Pratzen Heights to cut the Allied army in half. His bold plan relied on his correct prediction of Allied movements, the speedy arrival of Davout's Third Corps on his right, and a perfectly timed counterattack. The battle began around 7 a.m. as Austrian troops of General Kienmayer's advance guard clashed with French troops defending the village of Telnitz. In the face of overwhelming odds, the French fought stubbornly and bravely, but gradually they were forced back. But the Allies, instead of carrying out their great enveloping attack, did nothing. The morning mist and the late arrival of orders had led to confusion and delay, and it was another hour before the first 3 Allied columns were on the move. Soon fierce fighting erupted around Sokolnitz village and castle. Marshal Davout's corps, which had just force-marched 70 miles in 2 days, now arrived to strengthen the French right wing. Around 9 a.m, his lead infantry brigade appeared suddenly through the mist and retook Telnitz, before being driven back in turn by Austrian hussars. 2 more of Davout's brigades reinforced French troops at Sokolnitz. As the mist began to clear, Napoleon saw that, as he'd hoped, the Allied left was moving off the Pratzen Heights, and he ordered Marshal Soult's 4th Corps to begin its attack. To the alarm of Allied commanders, 2 French infantry divisions, until now hidden by the mist, were suddenly seen advancing straight towards the Allied centre. General Kutuzov was forced to hurriedly organize a defense of the heights, using troops of 4 column. 2 hours of bloody fighting followed. Musket fire was so rapid and furious that both sides were soon low on ammunition and turned to the bayonet. By 11 a.m, the French, with the advantage in training and discipline, had secured the heights and driven a deep wedge into the Allied position. To the north, a giant cavalry battle developed. While a Russian force from General Bagration's advance guard captured the village of Bosenitz, before it was halted by cannon fire from the Santon Hill. A decisive charge by 6 regiments of French heavy cavalry finally drove back the Allies, allowing Marshal Lannes' 5 Corps to move forward and and seize Blasowitz and Krug. Now, Grand Duke Constantine, commanding the Russian Imperial Guard, led forward this last Allied reserve in a desperate bid to reclaim the Pratzen Heights. A battalion of the French 4th Line Regiment was charged down by Russian Guard cavalry, losing its Eagle standard in bloody fighting. Napoleon, who'd moved up to the heights, sent in his own Guard cavalry. In this grim melee between the elite horsemen of both armies, the French finally prevailed. Napoleon had broken the Allied centre. Now, to close the trap on the Allied left wing, still locked in heavy fighting around Sokolnitz. Around 2 p.m, Napoleon ordered 4 divisions to swing south and cut off their retreat.
Imagine you're in this group down here. You go down, you start fighting, you have this bitter back and forth, taking, losing, retaking of this village, and then in the middle of fighting, you basically are surrounded. Like, before you can even look up and realize it, you're surrounded.
General Buxhowden, commanding the Allied left, only now saw the danger he was in. Attacked from 3 sides, the only escape was south. Many of his troops were forced to flee across frozen ponds. French artillery opened fire, trying to smash the ice with their cannonballs. About 200 men and dozens of horses drowned in the freezing water.
The Finns actually do that to the Russians in the Winter War. That's kind of a notorious thing that happened, is the Finns firing these, huge artillery onto the ice to break it and drown troops.
But not the many thousands of Napoleon's propaganda. The French Emperor had won a brilliant victory. His army had taken more than 10,000 prisoners and captured 45 enemy standards. Thousands of dead and wounded of all sides littered the battlefield. Many left untended for days. The Battle of the Three Emperors, as it became known, was a crushing blow to the Third Coalition. As Russian forces retreated back to Russia, Francis I of Austria was forced to accept a humiliating settlement with France, agreeing to pay a 40 million franc indemnity and give up more territory in exchange for peace. But meanwhile, news had reached Napoleon of a disastrous Franco-Spanish defeat at sea off Cape Trafalgar. British Admiral Lord Nelson, at the cost of his own life, had masterminded a victory so complete that it ensured British naval dominance not just for the rest of the war, but for the next 100 years. Britain, master of the sea, Napoleon, unbeatable on land. The whale and the elephant, neither able to challenge the other in its own domain. When William Pitt received news of Napoleon's victory at Austerlitz, he's supposed to have said, "Roll up that map of Europe, it will not be wanted these 10 years." A month later, Pitt was dead. But his warning that Europe faced another 10 years of war and upheaval was to prove prophetic. Napoleon Bonaparte was the ultimate disruptor of European history. One man who transformed a continent. If you want to find out more, why not try a...
Okay, so that was Napoleon's masterpiece, Austerlitz. Like I said, I'm going to jump into a History March series in a little bit, and I'll go back and forth between the two. Like, comment, subscribe. I will see you guys next time.